quite familiar with the area and the groups. And what this is there is a very small set of questions related to what in some publications was called ethnic tolerance or intolerance. I prefer to say that there are questions about ethnic exclusionism, which is a little bit of a softer, different dimension theoretically than intolerance. But these were questions that were included in a very large survey in all of Yugoslavia in 1988. And this is large enough of a survey to be able to get reasonably good estimates for not only the different republics, but for different ethnic groups within the republics. And there have been very few surveys that are big enough to be able to do that sort of thing. And so that's the first survey source that I'm listing here. And that's a mistake. That's supposed to be 89, not 99. And then this is the survey that our project organized later, with larger sample size, completed between November of 2003 and March of 2004. And then later, I met Robert at a meeting in Poland and was talking about this, and I was asking if it would be possible to include these items in his Balkan Monitor surveys. And so for 2012, we have a smaller sample, but still a fairly large one. And so we actually have an opportunity to look at the changes in attitudes towards these questions for very specific groups across a long period of time. And these are the items. And so first, that nationally mixed marriages are bound to fail. Men can only feel safe when the majority belong to their own nationality. Among nations, and this means nationalities in this context, or ethnic groups, it's possible to establish cooperation but not full trust. And then there are a couple more items that were added in our survey that were different from the original one. I wanted a question that was really more closely related to ethnic cleansing, and so one was that it's best that villages, towns, and cities be composed of only one nationality, but that question was only asked first in the survey that we did in 2003, and then again was included in the surveys that Robert was organizing. So we only have the comparison for these first three. And looking at them, I would say that if I started out blank without any ideas of questions, I might have chosen different questions. But of course I included these because this would be the only thing that we could get comparisons to the period before the breakup of Yugoslavia. And it also turned out to be the case that I did pretest on samples of 400 cases each in Serbia and Kosovo, in which I tried out approximately 30 different questions trying to measure something like the same thing. And it turned out that these questions worked better than the others, even though in my way of thinking and understanding them, they didn't seem to necessarily be the best questions, but empirically they worked fairly well. And there actually have been a number of quite important publications in the American Sociological Review and other journals done by Duško Sekulić in Croatia, together with Randy Hodson in the United States. And they've been based on using these plus a couple of different questions, mainly just looking at Croatia, and then earlier there were some analyses of just the survey in 1988. And you can't see this very well, but what this table shows is the correlations between different versions of the scale and different items. And although we don't have to go into this so much. It shows that if you use just those first 3 questions, and if you compare that to making a scale of adding the responses to all 5 of those questions that I showed you, the correlation between those is 0.95. And so although looking at the questions, you might think that the 5-question scale is a lot better than just the first 3 questions. I mean, I certainly would think so. But empirically, they're very highly correlated. So we actually can do okay with the 3-item scale. And I'm going to start by looking at the year in which we did our survey in 2003. And here, the longer the bar, the more ethnically exclusionist people's attitudes were. And as we can see, by far the highest values on this scale is for Kosovar Albanians, and the very lowest value on the scale is for Serbs in Vojvodina. So here we see the range, but let's look at our generalizations, okay? If we say that what really makes for a difference in ethnic exclusionism is the country, well, here we've got Bosnia and Herzegovina, but Croats and Bosniaks and Serbs have quite different responses on this question. And if we look at Macedonia, Macedonian Albanians and Macedonian Macedonians have quite different responses on the questions. If we want to say that what's really important is nationality, not country, well, then we'd see that there are significant differences between Croats and Croatia and Croats in Herzegovina and Bosnia. And that among Serbs, there are significant differences between Kosovar Serbs, tremendous differences between Kosovar Serbs and Serbs in Serbia, and between Albanians and in Kosovo, Macedonia, and let's see, actually it looks like Albania is out of this one. Okay.
Albanians in Albania, of course.
Well, for Albanians, it's about here. It's lower than it is for
You
Macedonia.
don't have the Hungarians from Vojvodina?
There are so few Hungarians from Vojvodina that there weren't enough for getting good estimates in the overall probability sample, the representative sample for Serbia. I did want to try to get enough, for estimates, and so we did go into the predominantly Hungarian settlements, about 5 of them, and get a supplementary sample. But since the sampling method isn't really as good as for the other data, I usually don't include them in the analyses. I do have a couple of papers in which they are separated as a group. I can tell you that they turn out to be pretty low. All of the groups in Vojvodina
This was my guess.
are quite liberal compared to the others. So I don't quite trust those over samples because they really are closer to opportunity samples than approximately random samples. But that is where they come out.
And how about gypsies? You didn't have that variable?
No. Basically, I thought that sampling gypsies would be too difficult. And again, we were planning in 2001, and some of the possible special samples actually were more possible by the time we did the survey in 2003, but we didn't plan for that. I would have liked to have added more Serbs in Croatia, but at the time we were planning in 2001, a lot were still outside of Croatia, a lot were in Zagreb. It spread around in a way that you couldn't find them very easily. So unfortunately I would have liked to have gotten gypsies, but we just thought that we couldn't go that So in any case, here we see the differences in 2003. Let's look at what things were like in 1988, and we see that in 1988, Bosniaks and Serbs in Bosnia and Herzegovina had the very lowest levels on these same items, and Croats in Bosnia were higher than the other two groups, but they were actually lower than Croats in Croatia. And so we see a completely different pattern for Bosnia and Herzegovina before 1990 than we do, by 2003. On the other hand, if we look at the situation for Albanians, here are Kosovar Albanians and Macedonian Albanians, and we see tremendous differences, before this process of the breakup of Yugoslavia was occurring. So quite different experiences for these groups. And then here are the differences in 2012. I think making the comparisons of changes is a little bit difficult when you're switching across graphs like this, but I can show you some. Unfortunately, the screen cuts off the top. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So, right. So here we see the changes in the averages across these three different periods, specifically for each group based on nationality by country. And so for Croatia, we see starting out at a relatively low level, then increasing and still being high by 2003, but having come back down recently almost to the level that it was before 1990. On the other hand, if we look at Bosnia and Herzegovina, where things have been so locked up and there has not been a resolution, we see that there is this tremendous increase from a very low level that was still there by 2003, and it really hasn't changed since then. And I think a lot of us are not surprised, but when you do this kind of analysis, sometimes you're surprised not to be surprised. when your expectations are actually met, that can be as much of a surprise as anything else. And then for Montenegrins, they were at a very low level, and they don't increase too much, but there is a steady increase in Montenegro, which also I think makes a certain amount of sense. Serbs, and these are Montenegrin Serbs, people in Montenegro who identify themselves as Serbs have different attitudes than people in Montenegro who identify themselves as Montenegrins, even though these categories are people changing, back and forth now and then. And the people who identify themselves as Montenegrin tend to be more tolerant on this scale than people who identify themselves as Serbs, but Serbs are not really so high in comparison to groups like we see in Bosnia and Herzegovina now, or in Kosovo. And Serbia was actually not increasing between the late 1980s and 2003 in the Serbian, excuse me, okay, Macedonia. Okay, Serbia did increase. No, wait. So, okay.
No,
These
it was
are, okay.
Serbs are very bad to decrease.
No,
Okay.
Serbs were already
Okay,
high
no,
in
this-
1988,
okay.
basically.
Yeah, I'm finally in touch with my titles here. Okay, so this is Serbian Serbs.
Yeah.
And there was no real change between before the war and after the war. There's a slight decrease afterwards. Vojvodina was low before the wars, stayed about the same, and has gotten even lower. And the curious thing is that for Kosovar Albanians, there's been no change at all. There's this very strong sense of ethnic difference and exclusion and and so on, before the dissolution of Yugoslavia, and it really didn't have any place higher to go later on, and it really hasn't gone down significantly. Now, I'm very curious about this decrease for Kosovo Serbs. I'd say this is one
Any explanation for that contradiction? Because they
for
live
the Kosovo Serbs.
yeah, they live together, and Kosovo maintain their
Actually, they
identity.
don't live together.
And
That sampling in what we did in 2012 had been only, we didn't find any Serbs outside of two zones. One which was in Mitrovica, and the other one which was a little bit on a conclave where they had higher concentrations in the, whatever it is, east, right? So
they
we
live in
have only,
segregated
we
areas.
really vastly had to oversample the regions to catch compact Serbs there. But what happened, at least comparing to our previous waves, that a lot of the Serbs who had been absolutely exclusionist had given up and moved back to Serbs. So those who stayed there were the more sort of accommodating, or those who were more likely to say, well, we don't have any other home to go, we might as well make some kind of thing. So that would be my.
Yeah. I think that's a good explanation, but especially the people that are south of these three northern municipalities that are in the enclaves in the southeast. So and we are dealing with somewhat small sample sizes here, so the standard errors are bigger in this case. And so not much change for Macedonians, who were not too high before, not too high by 2003, maybe it's slightly lower here. I didn't put in the error bars for the confidence intervals on these because it makes it look a little bit more complicated. But in any case, for Macedonian Albanians, we see a significant decrease at this point. So the main point here is that if you want to say that what's important is the difference across countries, well, that really doesn't quite capture it. If you want to say that it's different ethnic groups, that doesn't quite capture it. If you want to say that it's religious affiliation, that doesn't quite capture it. But the combination of all those, for the specific groups defined by the interaction of those, each of those groups has a different history, a different situation, and you can see it in the differences at any time, and you can see it in the changes over time. The only thing that I'll go back to is, this is a little technical, but in looking at the importance of other variables on people's attitudes, that if we start out just using variables for the combination of states by nationality, we're explaining about 20% of the variance between people without having any other variables. And when we add other variables, none of them adds as much as those differences between groups. If we look at how big the differences across years are, so we allow the differences by these combinations of nationality and state to vary across the 3 periods, then we improve our ability to predict to about 24%. And then if we add an effect for education, the effect is significant, but it's really very small compared to the differences between groups and the changes over time. And education actually has the strongest effect. Similarly, if we add age, there's a significant overall effect of age, but it's really trivial in size. And the same is true in terms of gender. And so, and in terms of a lot of these other dimensions of attitudes related to traditionalism, education has a tremendous effect. Size of place of residence has an effect. Age has a weaker effect. But those things don't have a very strong effect on these ethnic attitudes. These ethnic attitudes mainly move and depend on the specific situations of these groups and aren't differentiated very much by age group differences, cohort differences, differences between educational groups.
Thank you.